I think one of the strangest things about being human is that we spend our entire lives chasing something that we can never really explain. Something that everyone wants. Something that everyone talks about. Something that every person in some way is trying to find. And that thing is happiness. But the weird thing is, most of us never actually stop and question why we're chasing. We just assume we know. We assume happiness is somewhere ahead of us, somewhere in the future, somewhere after the next achievement, the next relationship, the next milestone, the next thing we finally get. And because of that, we spend so much time of our lives living in the mindset of when. When I get that, I'll be happy. When I achieve that, I'll finally feel good. When I become that person, everything will make sense. And the problem is, that word when can control your entire life without you even noticing. Because think about how often we say it. I'll be happy when I have more money. I'll be happy when I look better. I'll be happy when people respect me. I'll be happy when I find someone who loves me. I'll be happy when I finally become successful. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. Wanting to improve yourself is a good thing. Having goals is a good thing. Wanting more from life is a good thing. The problem is convincing yourself that your current life is just a waiting room before your real life begins. Because that's where a lot of people get trapped. They're always preparing to be happy, but they never actually allow themselves to be happy. But they never actually tell themselves they can be happy. And a lot of people can relate to this feeling. You're working towards something. You're exhausted. You're tired. You're imagining what life will be when you finally get there. And in your head, it feels like everything is going to change. Like all the problems you have right now will disappear. Like you'll wake up one day and suddenly feel completely satisfied with who you are. But then eventually, you'll get there. You'll achieve the thing. You'll reach the goal. And for a little while, it feels amazing. You feel proud. You feel relieved. You feel like all the effort was worth it. But then something strange happens. A few days pass, maybe a few weeks, and your brain starts looking for the next thing, the next goal, the next improvement, the next reason why you're not quite where you want to be yet. And suddenly the things you spent months or years chasing becomes normal. And I think that's one of the hardest things to accept. Sometimes the thing you thought would change everything doesn't. Not because it wasn't good, not because you didn't deserve it, but because humans are incredibly good at adapting. We get used to things, we get used to achievements, we get used to improvements, we get used to things that we once thought were impossible. And because we get used to them, we forget how badly we wanted them in the first place. I think about this a lot with social media and creating content, because it's so easy to think, if I just get more views, then I'll feel successful. If I hit a certain number of subscribers, then I'll finally feel like I've made it. And maybe you actually reach that number. Maybe you hit a milestone you were dreaming about. And for a moment, it feels unreal. You're proud of yourself. You look back and think how far you've actually come. But then your brain does something interesting. Instead of sitting there and appreciating, it immediately asks, okay, but what's next? And it's not even because you're ungrateful. It's just how our minds work. We're constantly moving the finish line. And I think everyone experiences this in different ways. Someone might think, once I'm in a relationship, I'll finally feel complete. Then they'll get into one and realize relationships still have challenges. Someone might think, once I have enough money, I won't stress anymore. But then they'll make more money, and their lifestyle changes, and suddenly they're chasing a bigger number. Someone might think, once people finally notice me, I'll feel confident. And then people notice them, but they still have the same doubts inside. And that's when you start realizing something important. Maybe happiness was never actually wanting or waiting at the end of the thing you were chasing. Maybe you were looking at it in the wrong place. And I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand happiness. They treat it like a destination. Like there's some point in life where you arrive and everything finally feels perfect. But life doesn't really work like that. There will always be something you want. There will always treat it like a destination. There will always be someone you could improve. There will always be another goal, another achievement, another version of yourself you think you need to become. And as happiness depends on reaching a place where no one is missing, then you're probably going to spend the rest of your life waiting, because something will always be missing. And maybe that's why some people can have everything they thought they wanted and still feel empty, because they spent so long believing happiness was something they had to earn, something they had to unlock, something they were only allowed to feel after proving themselves. But happiness isn't a reward you only get after becoming good enough. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, because we're taught from such a young age to constantly improve, get better grades, become more successful, work harder, achieve more, and again, none of those things are bad. The problem is when your entire identity becomes based around what you're achieving.
Can I put you on this?
Because then in every moment when you're not achieving something starts feeling like you're falling behind. And I think that's so many people why they're tired. Not because they're doing nothing, but because they're constantly chasing. Always moving, always trying to become someone better. Always thinking about the next version of themselves. And never really stop to appreciate the person they already are. Because imagine if you go back a few years and tell your younger self about the things you have now. The things you most wanted. The things that you once thought would be impossible. That younger version of you would probably be amazed. They'd probably think, how could you ever be unhappy? You've had everything I want. And yet somehow we still find new things to worry about. New things to chase. New things and new reasons why we just aren't enough. And I think that's the real problem with chasing happiness. Not wanting happiness, everyone wants that. The problem is believing it's always somewhere else. Because when you spend your entire life looking ahead, you'll stop noticing where you are. And sometimes the life you're trying so hard to reach is the life you're already living. I think one of the biggest reasons we struggle with happiness is because our brains are not actually designed to let us stay satisfied forever. And that sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually one of the reasons humans have survived and improved. Because imagine if humans were completely satisfied with everything they had thousands of years ago. Imagine if nobody wanted to improve anything. No one wanted better tools, safer homes. Nobody wanted to discover new things. We probably wouldn't have progressed the way we have. The same thing that pushes us forward is also the thing that makes it difficult to just sit still and appreciate where we are. Because the human brain is really good at adapting. Something can feel impossible one day and completely normal the next. Think about when you were younger. There were probably things you wanted to do more than anything. Maybe a certain toy, a certain game, a certain device, and something you thought would make you the happiest person alive. And when you finally got it, it felt incredible. You couldn't believe you had it. You were excited, you appreciated it, but then after a while, it just became normal. It became a part of your everyday life. And eventually, your brain started looking for something else, something new, something exciting. And this happens with almost everything. The thing is, we almost imagine a future of ourselves. We will appreciate things more than our current version does. We think, when I finally get there, I'll never take it for granted. But then we get there, and slowly we do. Not because we're bad people, not because we don't appreciate what we have, but because that's just how our minds work. We adjust. And I think that's why the anticipation of something is something more powerful than actually having it. Think about a holiday you're excited for. The weeks before, planning everything, counting down the days, imagining what it feels like. That feeling is powerful. Your mind creates this perfect vision of what's about to happen. The holiday arrives, and it's great. You enjoy it, you make memories, but eventually it ends, and the feeling fades, and suddenly you're back to normal life. And that's not because the holiday wasn't worth it. It was. The memories mattered, the experience mattered, but the feeling you once chasing wasn't designed to last forever. No feeling is. And I think that's something people struggle with. They think if something was truly right or truly meaningful, the good feeling would never disappear. But that's not how emotions work. Even the best moments in life eventually become memories. And this creates a cycle. You want something, you imagine it. You chase it, you get it, you feel amazing. Then eventually it becomes normal. So you find something else. And there's nothing wrong with having new goals. The problem is when you start believing the next goal will finally fix everything, because then you're not chasing growth anymore. You're chasing a feeling, and feelings always change. I think a lot of people have experienced this without even realizing it. Maybe you had a moment where you thought, this is it. Once this happens, everything will finally be okay. Maybe it's getting to a certain school. Maybe it was making a sports team. Maybe it was getting a certain amount of money. Maybe it was reaching a goal you had working towards for months. And when it happened, you expected this huge permanent chase inside yourself. Like you'd finally become a person you wanted to be. But instead, after a while, you were just yourself again. And that feeling is confusing, because you start wondering, why didn't this fix me? And I think that question is actually really important, because sometimes the problem isn't that we haven't achieved enough. Sometimes the problem is that we expected achievements to do something that we're never really meant to do. Achievements can make you proud, they can give you confidence, they can create opportunities, they can make your life better. But they can't completely remove every insecurity, every fear, or every doubt you have. Because those things don't come from circumstances, they come from how you see yourself. And I think that social media has made this even harder, because we're constantly seeing the highlights of other people's lives. We see someone achieving something and we only see the final moment. We don't see the years before it, the failures, the doubts, the boring days, the moments where we question ourselves. We see the result, and we compare their finished product to our unfinished process. And this creates another problem. We start thinking happiness is something other people have figured out. Like everyone else has reached this point where they're completely satisfied and we're the only ones searching. But the truth is, almost everyone is searching. Even people who look like they have everything. Because having more doesn't remove the human need to keep moving. And maybe that's why some of the happiest moments aren't actually when we achieve something huge. Sometimes they're random moments. A conversation with someone you care about, laughing until you can't breathe, a memory you didn't know would become important, a simple moment where you weren't thinking about the future or the past. You were just there. And I think that says something interesting. Maybe happiness isn't always found in the moments where we finally get what we want. Maybe it's found in the moments where we stop needing someone else to make the moment meaningful. Because sometimes the reason we miss certain memories isn't because they were perfect. It's because we were present. We weren't thinking about what came next. We weren't trying to upgrade the moment. We were just experiencing it. And I think that's something we lose as we get older. When we're younger, we're naturally more present. A normal day can feel exciting because we're not constantly thinking about the next achievement, the next milestone, the next version of ourselves. But as we grow up, we start living more in the future, always planning, always chasing, always waiting for the next thing. And maybe the hardest lesson is realizing that the future version of you that you're chasing is probably going to be looking back at you right now and wishing you would appreciate this moment before. Because one day, the things you currently have might be the things you miss. The current stage of life you're trying to rush through might be the stage you wish you could return to. And that's where we start getting into one of the biggest reasons happiness feels so difficult today. Because it's not just that our brains adapt, it's that we constantly being shown reasons why we have isn't enough. And that's where comparison enters the picture. Because sometimes happiness doesn't disappear because we've lost something. It disappears because we started looking at everything we don't have. I think one of the biggest reasons happiness feels so different today is because we're constantly surrounded by reminders of what we don't have. And that might be one of the biggest changes between the world we live in now and the world people lived in before. Because humans have always compared themselves. That's not new. People have always looked at each other and wondered where they stand. But the difference now is that comparison is no longer something that happens occasionally. It's something we can experience 100 times a day. You can wake up in the morning, on your phone, and within a few minutes you've already seen someone who looks more successful than you. Someone traveling somewhere amazing. Someone making more money. Someone having a better body. Someone in a relationship. Someone achieving something you wish you have achieved. And the strange thing is, your brain doesn't always process it as just information. It processes it emotionally. It doesn't just think, that person is doing well. Sometimes it thinks, why am I not doing that? And that's where comparison becomes dangerous. Because comparison takes something that should be inspiring and turns it into proof that you're behind. You see someone else's success, and instead of thinking, that's possible, you think, I'm failing. And the reality is, those two thoughts come from completely different places. One comes from possibility, the other comes from insecurity. And I think that's the hardest part of comparison, is it's never actually ending. Because there will always be someone ahead of you in some way. Someone who has something you want. Someone who is further along. Someone who seems like they figured things out earlier. And your happiness depends on finally being ahead of everyone. You're going to spend your whole life chasing a position that keeps moving. Because even when you're ahead in one area, your brain finds another area where you're behind. Maybe you'll become more successful, but then you'll compare your success to someone who is even more successful. Maybe you're becoming more confident, and then you compare yourself to someone who seems effortlessly confident. So maybe you're achieving something you were proud of, but then you see someone who achieves something bigger, and suddenly your achievement feels smaller, even though nothing about your achievement changed. And I think that's one of the saddest things about comparison. It can make you forget about your own progress. You can spend years becoming something that your younger self would be proud of. Then you look at someone else's life and it can make you feel like you've done nothing. And that's not because you haven't achieved anything. It's because you're measuring your life against somebody else's chapter. And social media creates the perfect environment for this, because most people don't post reality. They post moments, they post achievements, they post the best parts. Nobody is updating the boring days. Nobody's uploading the boring days. Nobody's posting failure. Nobody's showing every time they felt lost. So you end up comparing your everyday life to somebody else's highlight reel. And that's a comparison you can never really win. Imagine watching a movie and only seeing the best scenes. You'd think the character's life was perfect. You'd think they never struggled. You'd think everything happened easily. But you're not seeing the real story. You're seeing the edited version. And that's exactly what happens when we compare ourselves to other people online. We compare our full reality to somebody else's edited moments. And I think this creates a really dangerous mindset where people start believing they're only allowed to be happy once they catch up, once they're as successful, once they're as attractive, once they're as confident, once they're as anything in general. But there is no point where everyone reaches the same place. Everyone's timeline is different, everyone's journey is different, everyone is dealing with things you don't see. Hello? And I think that's another reason comparison affects us so much, is because we confuse other people's achievements with our own value. Someone else succeeding somehow feels like it's taking something away from us. But it doesn't. Somebody else being talented doesn't make you feel less talented. Someone else being successful doesn't make you less capable. Someone else being loved doesn't make you harder to love. But emotionally, it can feel that way. And I think this connects back to happiness, because a lot of people are actually unhappy with their lives. They're unhappy with how their lives compare to somebody else's. And that's a huge difference. Because if you remove the comparison, you might realize there's actually a lot to appreciate. A lot you're grateful for. A lot you would never want to lose. It's almost like comparison changes the way you look at everything. You stop seeing what you have, you only see what's missing. You stop appreciating progress, you only notice distance. You stop seeing journey, you only see the gap between where you and where you think you should be. And I think that's why people can achieve more than they ever have felt and still feel behind. Because the finish line isn't based on reality anymore. In fact, it's just being insecure doesn't disappear on when you achieve things. It just changes what you focus on. Because maybe that's why chasing happiness through comparison will never work. Because you're trying to find peace in a game that was never designed to end. There's no final ranking, there's no movement or moment where everyone agrees you've done enough. There's no point where nobody else is ahead of you. So maybe the question isn't, how do I be better than everyone else? Maybe the question is, how do I become someone I'm proud of, even when somebody else is hurt? Not because that's where the real peace starts, not when you finally win the comparison, but when you stop needing to. And I think this leads into something deeper, because if happiness wasn't found in achievements, and it isn't found in being ahead of someone else, then what are we actually searching for? What do we really mean when we say, I just want to be happy? Because maybe happiness was never the thing we're actually looking for. Maybe there's something underneath it the entire time. I think the biggest mistake when it comes to happiness is we treat it like something we have to find, like it's hidden somewhere in the future. Happiness isn't the absence of sadness. It's not the absence of failure. It's not the absence of struggle. Those things are part of being human. And honestly, if you removed every difficult moment from life, you'd probably remove a lot of moments that made life meaningful too. Because some of the strongest connections from our struggles, some of the biggest lessons come from failures. Some of the best moments come from imperfect moments. And I think that's something we all need to remember. The future version of yourself that you're trying so hard to become is still going to have problems. They're still going to have doubts. They're still going to want something else. Because being human means you always have another level to reach, another branch to climb. So if you're waiting to become a completely different person before you allow yourself to be happy, you might be waiting forever. Because the truth is, there is no final moment where everything becomes perfect. There's no achievement that permanently removes every insecurity. There's no amount of success that guarantees you'll never have another bad day. And I think that's actually a good thing. Because it means happiness was never locked behind some impossible finish line. It means it has always been available in smaller moments. The conversation with someone you cared about, the laugh you didn't expect, the random memory you looked back on years later, the progress nobody else noticed, the moments where you feel like yourself, the days where you are trying not to prove anything, the moments where you stop asking, what do I need next, and start asking, what do I already have? And maybe that's the biggest shift. Stop chasing happiness like it's somewhere and it will eventually arrive. Start building a life where happiness has room to exist. Because happiness isn't always found at the end of the goal. Sometimes it's found in the process of becoming. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this. Don't spend your entire life waiting for the next chapter to start. Because one day you might look back and realize the chapter you were trying to rush through was the chapter you were supposed to appreciate. The things you're worried about today might not matter in a few years. The things you're chasing today might not give you the feeling you expected. But the moments you're actually present for, those are the moments that become your life. Maybe happiness was never something you had to catch. Maybe it was something that was already there. You were just too busy running after it to notice.